The subsequent couple of years of writing the book was an amazing story also in and of itself, because we worked really hard to pack as much as we could in there, but we really had to rewrite it several times before it reached the current form it was in. And even to this day, I'm really honored and thrilled to see how it's resonating, because I never expected it, to turn out this way. So I think that growing up is a journey that no one knows how you actually get there when you get there. There's no straight line. There's no formula. This is not a cookbook. This is not follow these 3 steps and everything will be fine. And we know that the uncertainty of parenting young adults, or adolescents and young adults, is fraught with tremendous moments of fear and great concern, but also there's some great things that happen. And to see this young person become someone who can advocate for themselves and really begin to share what they've learned with you as a parent is one of the greatest joys of all. Well, I have a quote on the door of my office from the Once and Future King by T.H. White, in which Merlin is telling the young Arthur, who has suffered a terrible disappointment, and he says to him, the most important thing about sadness is to learn from it, to learn what it teaches you about life so that you can understand what it is that's going on and so that you can prepare for the next thing that's coming your way. And I do think that it's a tough time to raise kids. It's a really tough time, because not only because of the uncertainty that we talked about, but because I do think that we don't have the community around us that our parents had or their parents had, where you kind of grew up in a family that, and I'm not glorifying the old days, okay, because there was certainly lots of dysfunction in the early days as well in families and all the rest, and we can tell lots of stories about that. But the truth is that nowadays people often are not as connected to the sources of strength in their social networks. And this kind of virtual world that we're starting to live in much of the time really is puzzling to all of us, especially not just we as parents, but us as clinicians. What is it doing to young people to grow up in a world where their identity is being formed and changed by the social media, by their experience in the cyber world? And we don't really know a lot about that. What we're starting to realize is that at times, for some kids, it's a source of tremendous excitement and growth, and you can learn all kinds of things. But there's also a dark side to that world. There's a lot of meanness, there's a lot of bullying, and there's a lot of dangerous kinds of projected images, and it can overexpose. Kids can get overexposed to that. And then above and beyond the content of what's on the media, we ask ourselves, what is it doing to our brains that people don't turn off those shiny little screens and don't just breathe and look around and see the sky and walk and talk to humans? So part of what we try to think about are that the risks are a little different now. There were risks that we didn't face when we were young. The risk of entering a world that you're being judged all the time by how you look and by what you project of yourself. And this overinvested, we talk about the branded self, that you're kind of constantly trying to promote an image of yourself. And what does that do to who you really are? And what if the image you're promoting of yourself is hiding what you really feel inside? And then you become less able to figure out who you are in the process. It's hard as it is to grow up and figure out, what am I doing on this planet? And what am I going to do with the life I have? Is to also be constantly comparing yourself to everyone else on the planet, not just in your neighborhood. So we think it's daunting, but we also think that we should be talking to our kids about that. And I talk to all my patients about that. What is it like for you when you go online? Where do you go? Who do you hang out with? What are you learning from that? And most of all, how does it make you feel? But I do ask all of the people I work with and talk to is, do you ever feel like you're losing your sense of who you are in the process? And a lot of them say, yeah, and I could tell it's not good. I'm not sleeping enough. I'm not exercising enough. I'm not reading enough. I'm not talking to people enough. So those of us in the mental health field, as much as we think, for example, I think there's going to be absolutely effective therapy through the interface of, we now have digital health and digital mental health. That's great. People from all over the world can communicate and actually get help, right? So that's a plus. I'm not a Luddite. I really believe that power of being able to get help and get access to people who can enable you to solve your problems, whatever it is. We're so busy doing things and doing with no time to reflect, no time to just be. And I think, by the way, just what we were talking about, this internet activity is another form of doing. I actually think we need to be being in the life we're living, not just doing the life we're living. And what kids will often say is, they're so busy getting ready to go to school, taking a million AP classes, extracurriculars, having, almost no time to just be. And if there's anything we're seeing now that concerns me about that, this sort of over preparation we talk about, too many AP courses, too many things, too much homework, is that kids don't really know who they are. And they don't have that experience of just like being in touch with who you are, like look, that inner world. Who are you really? And I think that's part of this stage in life, is the search for the answer to that question. There's this fear of missing out, FOMO. It is a real force now. This fear that you're not going to know the latest what's happening, that you're going to miss somebody's text, that you're going to miss an important event that's everyone else is talking about, leads us to be compulsive in our checking our phones and in our not being able to tear our eyes away from it. So, the notion of continuous partial attention that has been coined by a number of people over the last 2 decades is that we're in the moment, but we're also somewhere else. Like we're also thinking about, and just watch as you walk along the street, how many people are not looking where they're going. They're just looking at their phones. And so I would urge parents and kids, because you can't ask your child to do something you're not doing yourself. It's simply to say, guess what? From 5 to 8, all these devices are placed outside and we just experience life for 3 hours with no interruptions, or 2 hours, whatever you can tolerate. Because that's really the way to approach the question of this invasion of of these shiny devices, is to say, put them in their place, use them the way they need to be, master the technology, don't let the technology master you. College is a great place. It's so exciting to be in college, to be with people, just like it has always been. Like it's kind of a segregated age group that gets to suddenly feel its power. Wow, here we are. But the anxiety about performance and grades and what you're ultimately going to get to after college has started to change the nature of college. But a lot of kids are in college saying, I really need to do well so that I can get somewhere else. This is a stepping stone to a career, a job, in economic security. So what then begins to happen is that all of their courses aren't things that they're learning. They're actually tickets to admission to some other place. And so there's a lot more, consciousness of grades. There's a lot more arguing with teachers when you didn't get the grade you wanted. We would have called that grade grubbing. No, it's not grade grubbing anymore. It's viewed as that's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to fight for that extra, point. I'll give you an example. I just heard about this yesterday. I was talking with some advisors at Wharton, okay? Pinnacle school, right? They're worried about the students and how stressed out they are. A student came into an advisor and was really upset because she wasn't able to get into a course, like a finance course. And what she said was, because I can't get in this finance course, I'm not going to be able to get an internship next summer at a bank, which is going to ruin my career. Basically, I will not be able to do what I want to do. And when the advisor said, well, you know, it's not the end of the world. You can actually take this course next year and you'll still be able to get where you want to go. Her response was, oh, all the upperclassmen told me that that's what you were going to say, but I don't believe you, okay? What that speaks to is the level of anxiety that distorts the reality to the point where you're not even trusting the people you're going for advice. And that, now, what does that mean on the side of mental health? Well, what it means is that people aren't taking as good care of themselves as they should. They're not sleeping enough. They're staying up too late. They're not exercising enough. They're not doing enough to protect their brains from what I would call overexposure to stimuli of any kind. And I do think that that leads to difficulties with perception, with distorting what's going on, with, quote, overreacting. Now, colleges have seen this, and now they've started to introduce curricula around wellness, teaching resilience, trying to get kids to step back and not feel like their life is on the line with everything. That if you didn't get into a class this semester, you'll be able to be all right the following semester, okay? And if you didn't get a good grade, it's not the end of the world. And we have a number of examples in our book of students who were panicked, literally panicked because they didn't do well. The real dilemma, though, and I really see this as a dilemma for colleges, is that they're not prepared and they can't afford to provide full spectrum mental health services to every student who comes in. If 1 out of 4 students comes in with already a mental health issue to start with, and another 1 out of 4 during college develops a problem, so you literally have half of the students in many universities seeking mental health. Well, that's a big price tag for universities. And it's forcing them to ask themselves, how much can we provide? How do we fund this? Okay. Some of it is funded out of student fees. Some of it is funded through the insurance. But even with that, and even with building the staffing, they're always feeling, it's almost like the highway where you build an extra lane, but by the time you build it, the traffic is still bad. This is what's been happening. And more and more, I think what colleges are starting to say is, we will provide the beginnings of treatment, but if you need longer care, you're going to have to go out in the community and find it. And even in a resourced community like Philadelphia, and I'm sure this is true in New York City, it's not that easy to find the best people to help you when you're struggling. And finding them and making sure you can get there if you're a busy college student is very intimidating. So I would say that to parents who are sending their kids off with any kind of either mental health issue, learning disability, anybody who falls in the group of those who we would say are a little more at risk, that discussion be had before they leave for school. We say that it's not just in college students, it's rising among high school students. And we sort of see it as suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Someone's experiencing a deep, deep, dark depression or feeling completely hopeless, has started to go into this spiral. And what we think most of all is that people need to recognize that in themselves, in their friends. Often family members don't see it because kids hide it from their parents. And the sad part is that in all of the stories that we had is that the mental illness was there, but the actual precipitating event that led to the act might have been something random. A lot of the impulsive acts that lead to suicide in young people, it's not like they've been sitting around planning it for a long time. It's almost like it was I would call it a confluence, a tsunami of both bad feelings and a feeling of being completely alone and not being able to see any way, other way out. Once you hit that mindset, you're convinced this is the only way out. It's very hard to even talk yourself out of it at that point, but sometimes if someone can spot that, or someone intervenes, finds you, then then you avoid the end, that terrible outcome. But I think that the fear of this occurring shouldn't make parents feel like, oh, if I haven't heard from my kid in a day, that means they're, in trouble. I think that's where we tend to almost make it sort of like this suicide watch, so to speak, which really, if you're that concerned about your kid, they should be in treatment. Okay? And we really speak to this notion that, especially if there have been mood disorders in the family, or previous attempts on the part of the young person, that person needs to be regularly in treatment with someone, that they need to have a relationship that they can trust. And the biggest question I think parents need to ask their kids as they go off to college is, if you were really to feel terrible about your life and hopeless, who could you talk to? And it doesn't have to be you as the parent. As long as they have someone in their life they can turn to when they're in trouble, as long as there's someone who's the lifeline, that's the key. Mental health practitioners, all of us, feel that the stigma of mental illness or of being ill in whatever way that leads to not being able to function or just being different is seen by other people as it's almost like a judgment that this person isn't good enough in some way. And then individuals internalize that. So I grow up with being different for whatever reason, and I begin to feel like that isn't acceptable to the world. So what happens? Well, I hide that part of myself. The shame dynamic. I internalize the stigma. So we call that self-stigma. So on the one hand, there's the world around us that's very judgmental. Many kids get teased for being different. Many kids get teased for having learning problems or ADD or not being able to, stay with the flow of the conversation, being a little awkward. Well, that internalizing of that self-stigma is what we worry that leads people not to get the help, okay? Because they then begin to think that's a confirmation that I'm screwed up. And I don't want to look at that. That's the other, one last point about this is it also leads many kids who've been doing fine with care, with treatment, when they go off to school to stop their meds or to not go through the accommodations that they were given because they think, I don't need this, in an effort to sort of prove that they're, quote, normal. And I always say normal is overrated. We are who we are. There is no such thing as normal.